Hi, my name is Marilyn Ebert, and right after I moved here in 1988, I discovered the Barnacle and knew it was a very special place. And Bill and Charlie Munroe were lucky enough to grow up here, and I wanted to preserve their memories, and I hope you enjoy this film.
There are many historic homes in South Florida, but rarely are we lucky enough to hear from those who grew up on the property. But in the case of the Barnacle, we have Bill and Charlie Munroe to share their memories.
It was a paradise. It was a world all its own. It really was.
But we didn't know it. I didn't, and I just took it for granted. Doesn't everybody grow up like this?
I imagine that it was absolutely heaven. It's just being in South Florida and all this wonderful, beautiful weather and the view of the bay and being able to have the bay as your playground, your front yard.
Well, Bill, I'm always amazed that, we talk to people about the front of the house and the back of the house. We look at it, and of course, that's the front of the house, the waterfront and the front lawn and the front of the house. And I don't know when they put in Main Highway, but
long before our day.
Long before our day.
The Barnacle was built in 1891 by Ralph Middleton Munroe, Bill and Charlie's grandfather. The house stayed in the family for 82 years. The boys were young when World War II broke out.
We were pretty small, but World War II did affect us.
It was on a Saturday, and we were eating lunch at the Biscayne Bay Yacht Club, which was almost adjacent to the Coast Guard station. And these were all amphibious planes, and they would launch in the water and go off, and there's a lot of activity going on, and they would leave, and then we figured out they were leaving with a bomb underneath each wing, and when they came back, the bombs weren't there, and so we figured something was going on, and the next day, the Miami Herald said, oh, they sunk a German submarine down off Key Largo.
The black crude oil that came out of that ship covered all the beaches, all the waterfront here was covered with it, the boats and everything. It was a mess.
They saved that in cans and buckets, and they would pave the driveway by pouring that tar on the driveway to keep the dust down.
The property was a grand playground.
I love playing in the woods. I mean, I pretended I was Tarzan or something to that effect, but I also love the waterfront, and so we had two different worlds to play in. This is the hammock that I used to play Tarzan in.
I imagine it was a paradise, the kind of childhood that many children dream of, playing pirates and all the games that children played all over the rest of the country and the world, but playing it surrounded by tropical vegetation and beautiful wildlife, lizards, parrots, and all manner of interesting people.
One such interesting person, George Sands from the Bahamas, came to live with their grandfather and later helped raise the boys.
And George Sands was, almost a surrogate father to some extent.
And he was just here when we grew up, and he was with us, I guess, until mid-50s when he passed away.
And the school was unique in the fact that it was school from Tuesday to Saturday noon. So we didn't go to school on Monday, and then went to school for half a day on Saturday. So we only went to school 4.5 days a week.
My grades weren't the best, and so the folks decided to...
Don't ever admit that, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. That maybe the Ransom School, which was just starting back up again, and graduated from that high school there, 5th in my class, out of 5.
This whole patch used to be guava trees. This is where we got all our guava from for making guava jelly. And that was kind of fun.
Mother made guava jelly for loads of it, bottle after bottle of it.
In fact, Katrina's office was always known as the jelly room, but now it's her office today.
Bill's favorite memories took place on the water.
Really spent most of my time on the waterfront. So it was probably to do with boats and that sort of thing, sailing. It was just, we had boats to paint and boats to sail. And
boats to bail out.
That's true. I spent a lot of hours in this boathouse building boats. I built a couple of small boats in here, 17-foot skiff and outboard skiff. And I spent a lot of time upstairs supposedly studying, but that didn't do too well. And there's the egret, copy of the egret that Granddad built as his communication boat before there were roads. back in the days when he worked as a wrecking agent for ships ashore on the reef.
The property hasn't changed much since their grandfather, Ralph Munroe, lived there.
The cottage we grew up in was situated right here where the pavilion is today, and it was a two-bedroom, one-bath cottage.
1945 hurricane, it literally just kind of washed right through it.
It had floated away on 2 previous occasions into the neighbor's yard, so my grandfather brought it back, and this time he built 4 big concrete planters on each corner of the house.
We moved to this house in 1940, Bill, does that sound right?
Yes, after my grandmother, who was living here, died, we moved from the cottage down on the bayfront up here.
And do you remember crawling out from underneath there, Bill, from the...
Oh yes, we crawled under the house. We'd go in through
The pantry. The
through
pantry,
the
and the
pantry
kitchen.
and crawl around under the house. And one time we came out here, yes.
So the house is definitely built up off the ground. Yes, it's a little claustrophobic when we did that. Bill, remember when you used to put that on your head and the chiggers would get out of there and
The
start
bugs would
biting your
make
head?
you itch something terrible.
Here, try it again.
No way.
Coconut Grove was a tiny little village, and everything in that village was what we needed. We never went to Miami to do anything except my mother took us down there one time to buy a coat or something because it was 5 miles away and we seldom drove to Miami.
They could walk outside and they knew their neighbors well. There were stores all around. The playhouse was going. I mean, all of these things were going on. So I think for them, it wasn't that great of a change from how it had been from, say, when Ralph Munroe was living here.
Rayleigh Milan's was a hardware store, and that was always intriguing to me. I remember buying something and coming home with it. It was a little headlamp that you could put on and battery powered, and I got it home, and my mother questioned me about what I was going to do with that, and talked me into returning it.
She was after us all the time. Get your elbows off the table. No, don't use your fork like that. So that was all part of the mom's doing for us.
And of course, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but now I realize that she really enforced some good manners on us. Now, Bill, if you'll get a broom and start sweeping the floor. My mother would stay up at night until I got home. And she always could determine when I got home because I would step on that step right there and it would creak. And so that would wake her up and she knew I was home. So then I got to the point where I always missed that step.
They spent their summers in North Carolina. It took a day and a half to get there by train.
Because we rode the train up, we didn't have a car there. And so she would literally walk down to the little country store and buy the groceries, and she had a pair of blue jean coveralls. And then she loaded the legs up with canned goods and food and everything else like that, and then she hung it over her shoulders and walked back up the hill.
Their father, Worth, followed in his father's footsteps and was a boat designer.
He was always in his office or down at the boathouse. He always would seem very relaxed. I mean, my mother was the spark plug, the driver in the family.
Well, I think Bill and Charlie's mother and father had a really big part of creating who they are and giving them the love of the land and having them keep the flame growing. Mary Munroe definitely was the keeper of the flame. She guarded everything, even from her children. She guarded everything, and that's why we have so much to document the Barnacle and the Munroe family today.
Bill and Charlie's grandfather was also a ship salvager. The habits of recycling and reusing passed down through the generations.
These are the old tiles that came out of the Royal Palm Hotel when they tore that place down, or were they scrap pieces left over? I don't remember what.
When they tore it down, about 1926, I believe it was,
Okay.
Grandpa got in there and collected all he could, reused them here to make this patio. And we saved everything.
That was the key, because there wasn't a drugstore, there wasn't a hardware store to go buy it at.
In the old days, before we arrived,
But that habit hung on.
it still does today. I've got more junk and I know what to do with it.
Bill, tell us about the punt.
The punt was built here in this boathouse by my grandfather. It was intended or built as a tender for his 26-foot sailboat, the last sailboat he had. to carry on deck. Even though she was shoal draft, when you anchored out, he didn't want to get his feet wet to get ashore, so he built this little light boat that he could carry on deck. And when I was about 8 years old, my dad gave it to me as my first boat. Kept it all these years, and I've had it tucked away, and finally I decided I'm not using it anymore. Like the last time I used it was to help tie up my sailboat for Hurricane Andrew. So I decided it was time to bring it home to the Barnacle.
Bill, I noticed that you didn't line up the screw heads properly, right, with a slot in them, and you've got some Phillips head and a slot head.
Now you're giving away my secrets.
This beautiful quilt was made by Bill's wife Irene, a fabric artist, using Mrs. Munroe's well-worn sheets. Irene dyed them, cut them, and stitched them into this Seminole pattern to preserve for future generations. She named it Mama Sheets. The House of the Three Sisters is another good example of recycling and reusing. It sat on the property and was built from lumber salvaged from a ship named the Three Sisters.
Used as a storeroom when we grew up, and it finally got in such deplorable condition that Dad said we had to tear it down. So we all did it right there ourselves.
But the photograph I have of it shows people standing on the porch of the house, so somebody must have lived there. The well, the freshwater well, was still operable.
The well, yes.
Oh, the well.
This was here when Grandpa bought the property, the 40 acres. I assume it was dug by the Indians, used it, I believe, and the local people would come here and get fresh water. Back in those days, the canals and rivers hadn't been dredged through the coral ridge that goes along the coast here. So the Everglades had about 3 feet more elevation in water, creating a head. And the water would run through the limestone and flow into this well and down into the bay.
My first idea of conditioned air was my mother had a baby blue porcelain tub.
For washing the baby in.
For washing, me, maybe him. But then they'd go get a big block of ice and set it in the tub and put a fan on it and blow the cold air. Of course, it wasn't the dry air, it was wet air, but it was cooler.
When we lived here, there were screened porches. The upstairs porch was all screened in. And we spent a lot of time there in the summers when it was hot.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'd sleep out there just to be cool. There being no air conditioning, of course.
The holidays were always special at the Barnacle.
It was always a big celebration here.
For Thanksgiving.
For Thanksgiving and Christmas. In the dining room, there was a table it was a round table that would stretch out to where you could seat 27 or 30 people around it. And the room was full. We'd go out west of
Lejeune Road, pretty much.
Lejeune Road and south of Dixie Highway, and part of the early developments of Coral Gables, where they'd put pink sidewalks in and paved streets, but there were very few, if any, houses. But in between the sidewalks and the roadways was pine trees, young pine trees. So we'd go out until we found one we liked and cut it off, put it on top of the car, and bring it home. So
Boating and the waterfront were always a big part of their lives, and still are today. The Comanche was built for a friend in 1956, but today it's back in the family.
My dad spent many hours designing this boat. I was lucky enough to work as a draftsman for him, part-time on that. And then when the design was finished, I went to work with the builder, and 3 of us built the boat in 6 months. And I got to go in the first race with it, which we won. But later on, when Jack Price decided he wanted to do something different, get another boat, we talked Charlie's father-in-law into buying it because he was ripe for a new boat. So that's how it got
talking into.
That's how I got back into the family, or into our family.
Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Taxes on the property were skyrocketing, and it was time to make a decision.
And we just couldn't really afford to hang on to it, and Dad didn't want to part with it, so we waited till after he passed away and finally let it go to the state of Florida.
In the meantime, the developers were all over my mother. Don't you want to sell? We could make it. We could make this the clubhouse. You know, build some high-rise apartments around it, and she didn't have any part of that.
Because of the efforts of local historian Arva Moore Parks and then Florida State Senator Bob Graham, the Barnacle was saved, and today is a 5-acre state park unlike any other. This is the last photo of the family taken by the boathouse on the day of the sale in 1973.
And this, of course, is in memory of our mother, Bill.
Yes.
Right? Mary Poor Munroe, beloved wife of Worth Munroe, 40-year resident of the Barnacle. Wow. A frangipani tree, pretty pinks. She loved it.
And next to it is one in memory of our Aunt Patty, who was part owner and grew up here, born and grew up here.
My hopes and dreams that it stays like it is. And literally, when you walk down the driveway, time after time, when I'll bring a friend down here, they say, wow, this really is a step back in time, isn't it? And it is.
When you leave Main Highway, you're leaving behind the 21st century, and every step brings you closer to the past. I live above the office in the old carriage house, and I wake up every morning excited to get downstairs.
It is an absolute piece of our past that there's nothing else like it.
I'm happy to see it carry on as it is. It's fun to come back here and reminisce a little. And I've tried, still involved with the waterfront. It is great to be here, and there's so many functions that the place is really busy as a park. And to have it hidden right here inside the big city and so active, it's good. Well, it was a great life, and due to times it's passed on for us as far as living here, but we're glad it's here.
Thank you for watching, and thank you to the villagers and to everyone else who funded this film.